Good evening, and welcome to another edition of Carded Tarot Tales, Still Safer at Home Storytelling. I'm Ryan McGranahan, your host for the evening, and I'm joined this evening by two wonderful friends of mine, Emerson Dameron and Liz McDonald. And I couldn't be more excited to have them on the show. And tonight we're going to be using a really fun tarot deck. It's called the Deck of the Bastard. And what it is it's a combination of different historic tarot decks. I wanted to use. I'm really into historic decks, and I have recently acquired an Atelier deck. And Atelier was a late 18th century occultist and hairdresser, and he was the first person to sort of really champion tarot for the divinatory use. Before that, it was game playing, and he created the first deck designed for divination. But the it doesn't follow standard conventions, and so I'm not going to be using that deck because I actually haven't learned how to read it yet. I'm working on it, but there's very few resources in English actually on it. Most of the books written on it are in French, so I'm working through it very slowly. But what I am using is a deck called the Deck of the Bastard, and it uses the Atelier court cards and major arcana, and then combines that with there's some Solobusca influence, and the minors are mostly versions, the same versions you'll find in the Rider-Waite deck. So it's not historic, it's a modern artistic recreation, but it's a lot of fun and it has a lot of history built into it. And so we're going to be using that for our reading. And with that out of the way, I'd like to introduce our first storyteller. He's one of my favorite storytellers in Los Angeles. I get a kick out of hearing him every time. He's a good friend of the show. He's been on before, and we're pleased to have him back. Please welcome Emerson Dameron.
Thank you, Ryan. I am Emerson Dameron, and because this is a spiritual show and a lot of people are going through a spiritual time right now, I decided I would share my most quintessentially LA spiritual experience. And this happened a number of years ago. I participated in an art project which took the form of a large area role-playing game, a LARP. I think a lot more people know what that is now, but it was a LARP based on the teachings and the structure and the internal logic of EST, which was a series of large group awareness trainings, personal growth seminars that happened in the 70s and 80s, run by Werner Erhard, which are largely regarded as a cult. I was always curious to try joining a cult. It seemed like an efficient way to make friends. And this seemed like a low stakes way to try it, to participate in this ersatz est experience and just kind of get a taste for the cult lifestyle and see what it was like. So with that in mind, I show up at the Hammer Museum where the project is taking place with all of the other players. We are herded into a large auditorium. They close the door, and for the next couple of days, we are abused and berated and called assholes and not allowed to take bathroom breaks outside of designated times. If you ask to take a bathroom break out of the designated times, you will get a vigorous ringing out and a lecture about your selfishness. And as this is happening, we're being watched by the guests in the museum on monitors in other parts of the museum so that they can see this go down. The program itself is a mix of psychobabble, Scientology, Zen Buddhism, some kind of Napoleon Hill, up and atom, new thought, inspirational gibberish, all mixed together into this soup that is designed to throw you off balance. It's supposed to be destabilizing, and the idea behind the program is that it's there to demolish your ego. It's there to run a wrecking ball through the structures of your identity and to destroy everything you believe in and then set you free to rebuild and become the person that you want to be or become a cult member. It can go either way. Um, what adds an extra layer of MC Escher op art weirdness to this enterprise is the fact that we are the other players and I are experiencing it through the filters of characters that we've created. Since it's a performance art piece, we've been assigned to come up with characters with traits and backstories and dark secrets and everything else. My character is named Win. He is a depressed alcoholic with a lot of conflict going on in his life and his mind, and he is based pretty closely on me. There's not a lot of daylight between me and the character that I've created, which makes the whole experience even stranger than maybe it could have been otherwise, because it's very hard to tell whether all of these experiences are happening to me or happening to Win, or whether the whole thing is so abstract that it doesn't really qualify as a human experience at all in the way that we usually think about it. Some of the other players do much more creative stuff with their characters. A lot of them are actors or performance artists, and it's LA, so everything is an audition. And a lot of them make really interesting choices. Like, there are characters with traumatic secrets that don't come out until the middle of day 2. They really play that long game. And there are other characters who are players who commit to characters who are defined by their lack of commitment to this program, that are aggressively skeptical and constantly making trouble and very willful and selfish, and they're kind of there to troll the facilitators who are constantly trying to beat them down, and creates all kinds of friction and drama. There's a rule as part of one of the rules of the program, one of many, is that there are no drugs or alcohol allowed during the program itself, or during the breaks, or during the Saturday night break, which finally does arrive. It's a long time coming. We don't get the Saturday doesn't wrap up until about 10 o'clock p.m., at which point I make the decision that Win is going to break the rule against alcohol consumption. I feel like that's true to his character. That's what he would do. And also, I really need to get drunk. So I go and do that and show up Sunday morning badly hungover for day 2, which turns out to be a bad mistake because day 2 is full of group exercises. At one point, I'm sitting across from an older woman and repeating the phrase, "I am your mom. I am your mom. I am your mom," dozens and dozens of times until she has a full tilt nervous breakdown right in front of me. Or the character does. I have no idea at this point where the lines are. Later on, I'm down on the ground and trying to push my way up as the other players are holding me down, yelling, "Get up, get up, get up." And I can't get up until my will to get up exceeds the commitment that they have to keeping me down. and I don't know whether this is happening to me or the character, but I know that the sweat and the tears and the snot are coming from my body, which was still my body last time I checked. And it rolls on to the end, at which point we get the big reveal of what all of this is about, which boils down to everything in life is utterly meaningless. And the deeper you go, the more meaningless it gets. And the most meaningless thing you could possibly do is bitch about how meaningless it is. It's really just your cue when you realize that to sit in the flow of experience and just be there and let things happen, because things happen. Whether you try to make them happen or not, trying to make them happen usually makes it more difficult. And then they ask, did you get it? And I'm not sure if I got it, or if I got that I didn't get it, or if I didn't get it, or I got. But Wynn did get it. Because fictional characters have that luxury. If it drives the narrative forward, they can have a big breakthrough and change the course of their lives. In Wynn's case, he broke free of his addictive behavior. He broke free of his depression. His ego thoroughly demolished. He was set free to start his own business and start a new life, which I, Emerson, decided to celebrate by going out and once again getting banjo pixelated, pants sweating drunk to the best of my ability, which did not stop me from waking up on time the following day and showing up on time for what is definitely the weirdest session of talk therapy that I've ever had in my life. And that is my most quintessentially LA spiritual story. Thank you.
Oh my God. Thanks for sharing that, Emerson. That's fantastic. I went through, while you were telling that story, I was flipping through my cards and thinking of what to pair with that. And there's a lot there, and I was kind of thinking of the tower, because this LGAP training and EST is all about the breakdown. But what I went more with was what I ultimately chose was the Seven of Cups, and you can see there's 7 cups on it, and there's various, they're in the clouds, and there's various things emerging from the cups. And it's traditionally a card associated with illusions, and I think there's a lot of illusion in that story, whether it's whether things are really happening to you or the character. At what level is this your experience? Is what level is this a game? So I think I think that's really appropriate, and yeah, I had. I think you're brave to do that. I was I had a coworker who was all about the Landmark Forum, and like she was trying to recruit me for it. So I was like, oh, I'm going to Google what this is, and then I got online. I was like, oh no, and not for me, thank you. So I'm a little jealous that you had that experience, but I think the price of admission maybe is too high for me to find out what's exactly involved with that. So I'm going to tell a story that took place for me. This was back in college, and college was rough for me. I was depressed in high school, and I'd kind of been given the message that all I had to do with my depression was hold on and survive high school and make it to college, and everything would be okay in college. That sort of all the problems I was having with the world, I had learning disabilities, so I was smart, but I really struggled in school, and And I was just given the impression that none of that would matter in college. And that turned out not to be the case. Like college didn't really fix anything, but it did pour a lot of booze on the situation. And I got really depressed in college, and I ended up going to see a psychiatrist, and I got put on antidepressants, and they take a while to work. So the first week and a half or so I was on antidepressants, I didn't really notice a change, and then I noticed my sense of smell coming back, and I caught myself laughing because I was going to USC, and one day I was walking, and just the waft of semen like enters my nose, and I just cracked up because it's a funny smell, because there's trees by USC, and they smell like cum. And after being depressed for a long time, just to notice that smell brought me out of my depression for a moment and made me laugh, and like it was like a silly little thing. And then after that, like I noticed my sense of smell coming back in other ways. Like I'd notice the smell of roses or other things, but not only was I becoming less depressed, but I was starting to get racing thoughts, and I stopped sleeping. I didn't realize this at the time, but I was having an antidepressant triggered manic episode, and like things got really bad. And I had medication to sleep to help me sleep. It was like Sonata, which I consider like Ambien's cooler, more rebellious little brother. And like I ended up abusing the Sonata. Like I would sprinkle it on a bowl of pot and smoke it, and then I would feel like the walls become sentient, and as I breathed in and out, I could watch like the walls breathe in and out, like I stayed up all night not sleeping. And I didn't realize I was becoming manic. I just thought I was having issues because I'd stopped sleeping. And eventually my roommates got really worried about me, and they called my dad, and my dad came to school to take me to the hospital. And if I'd known what was going to happen, I wouldn't have gone along to the hospital willingly. But I went to the hospital, and I ended up committed to the psychiatric ward. And like that was like waking up in a nightmare. Like I had watched Terminator 2 obsessively growing up. Like I've seen Sarah Connor escape from the hospital so many times, and that was like that was traumatic for me. And then like waking up in that situation, it was devastating. But the because I'd watched that obsessively though, I knew how to react. Like I was going to copy Sarah Connor. Like I was in the mental hospital. Like I'm going to escape. And so that's what I did. I set out trying to escape, and I would stand as close to the door to the locked ward as I could. And the staff would always back me up from away from the door. They'd be like, "Ryan, you're too close to the door. Like you're too close to the door." And I would step back, and I'd have them define a spot on the floor. Like I had made them draw a line, like to show how close to the door I was allowed to stand. And then I would just gradually creep over the line and get as close to the door as I could. And after a couple days, they, I just inched closer to the door. I spent two or 3 days hanging out in front of the door. And on like day 3, a doctor comes through the door, and he opens it too wide, and I'm out like a flash. Like I escaped through the door, and alarms start going off. There's like a klaxon. I run to the elevator, and the elevator's been shut down, and I'm panicking, and I'm trying to get out of the hospital. And I run down these stairs, and there's like guards are coming out of everywhere. And I backed myself into a corner, and like the guards were advancing on me. And I backed into this little alcove where there was a planter, and I said, I'm not threatening anybody, but this is my personal space. And like, if anyone comes into it, I'm going to defend myself. And here's something I've learned in life. Ultimatums don't work very well, but like, certainly ultimatums you give as a patient in a mental hospital don't work well at all. And so they did come into my personal space. and I got into a massive fight with the security guards, and it went pretty well at first, but there are just so many more of them than there are of me. And eventually they tackled me to the ground. They stripped my pants off. They injected Lord knows what into my butt and carried me back to the ward. And at this point, I wasn't doing well. Like as I was being carried back to the ward, I started to hallucinate. Like I saw the pattern in the carpets like turn into these snakes, and it's like I'm a tripper. I like to trip, but like when you know you haven't taken anything and you're seeing snakes where there shouldn't be snakes, it's a little bit disturbing. And so after that, the hospital, I tried to get out through the legal process. Like I had an attorney, but they took me to court. But because I tried to escape, I was like in Hannibal Lecter type restraints, and they drugged me out of my gills, so I couldn't stop. When it was my turn to talk to the judge, I couldn't stop slurring my speech and drooling, and my attorney's like, "You have to cancel this hearing." So I couldn't get myself out of the hospital, and eventually, just time runs out. They can only hold you for so long. Like I was on a 3-day hold, and then I was on a 14-day hold, and then on day 17, they had to let me go, and it really messed me up mentally for a while, and I was traumatized from it. But and I was really afraid of the hospital. And then a couple years after this happened, I went back to, this was at Cedars-Sinai, and I went back to Cedars-Sinai Thalian Center, and they were in the process of renovating, and it was about to close down. And I went to the locked ward that I was on, and there was just a sign on the door, on the other side of the door, and it said like warning, elopement risk. And somehow that broke the spell. I was able to see that sign and laugh, and I was like, yeah, you're goddamn right, there is an elopement risk. And I was able to laugh, and also to understand that it wasn't just this place that had power over me. It was a moment in time, and it was a moment in time I moved beyond, and that I was giving power to something that was no longer relevant to my life, that I'd moved on from what had happened there. And it was an unpleasant experience, but it was something that had happened to me, not something that had to define me. And so that's that's my experience with my trip to the mental ward. And what I've been doing now is instead of I feel like I'm a little close to my own stories to try to assign appropriate cards. So on these shows, when I've told my own story, instead of trying to deliberately pair it with a story, I've been drawing a card at random and letting synchronicity relate it to the story I've just told. And so far, it's worked really well. And I'm going to continue that tradition, and hopefully the card I pull will relate to what I've just shared, or I'll be able to relate it to what I've just shared. And the card I've pulled was the Eight of Pentacles, and it's a card about doing your work and progressing in the external world. And I think that relates to my story, because basically what I was able to interpret from the hospital was that it didn't have to define me, that it wasn't going to change what I had to do with my life going forward, that it wasn't going to change what I had to accomplish, and that I could push forward with my own personal goals and who I had to be in the world. So I think that works pretty well. So we have our two cards so far are the Seven of Cups and the Eight of Pentacles. There's a nice progression there. The sevens right into the eights. There's some logic to that. And I'm really excited now to bring up our next storyteller. She's a good friend of mine. She's an all-around cool person. I know her because she used to run in Los Angeles, the coolest yoga studio I've ever been to. And it's a real treat to have her on the show because she's actually responsible for me getting into tarot cards. I used to have a very conservative Republican, like hippie stuff is dumb, like the material is what's real, and sort of the spiritual side is not worth investigating. And I used to be dismissive of things like crystals and psychics and tarot and New Age. And through Liz McDonald's yoga studio, I really started to open up my mind, and I had some mystical experiences with her where she was doing yoga with me, but also doing some energy work. And I had some amazing things happen that really showed me that I didn't know everything, that there was a whole other side to the world that I wasn't exploring. And it was actually leaving her yoga studio one day that introduced me to the group that got me into tarot. So our next storyteller is Liz McDonald, and in a lot of ways, my friendship with her is responsible for me having this tarot card themed show. So I'm so excited to have a friend on, and it feels like serendipity. So please welcome my good friend, Liz.
Hey, Ryan. What a fantastic intro. Thank you so much. That was brilliant. Very high vibes. First of all, I just wanted to say, you're the first person I've ever heard actually mention the semen trees. Like, I thought I was actually outside of the yoga studio where we did 420 yoga, there's like a row of trees. And whenever I walk my dog, I would also get like that distinct smell. And I would tell people that, and people would be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so like, I'd really like to just nail down actually what that tree is called, because now I know that it exists. All right. So you are also validating things for me. All right. So I think I am going to tell a story from my Brazil days. So before I moved to LA, I lived in Brazil about 6-7 years. And this was probably, I want to say this was like my last year there. And I worked in an American school, and I was kind of the person that helped a lot of the new teachers who were just kind of like fresh off the boat, like the Americans, get their feet wet, especially the interns. So these kids who are coming in straight out of college around, like 22 years old, I would often chaperone them or, take them on holiday with me or whatever, and kind of be their tour guide. So great. So put a pin in that. Easter time came around this year, and we had a whole week off, and I really wanted to go somewhere. But the thing about Brazilians is that on the holidays, the price of everything triples. And it's like really infuriating, because they even call it like a package deal, but the package deal means that you're basically getting screwed. And we didn't have that kind of money. Okay. So the dollar had really fell a ton. My friend Katie, who was an intern, was going to come with me. And so I did my best bargain hunting possible. Now, let's also keep in mind, like, the internet was a thing, but there wasn't necessarily like Yelp Brazil or anything like that. So I actually had to do like flipping through pages and stuff to try to find a cheap place to stay. And so I consulted this guide called Brazil Good and Cheap. And I was like flipping through and like calling one place after another, was telling me, oh yeah, it's only like $2,000 for the week. And I was like, dang, this really sucks if I'm going to be stuck in Sao Paulo during Easter week, because Sao Paulo is just horrendously ugly. Like, I stayed in Brazil because I love Brazilians and because I loved my vacations on the gorgeous beaches. But actually, Sao Paulo itself is just beyond, like, apocalyptically ugly. Just like a downtown that stretches for like when you're in the plane and you're coming into Sao Paulo and you're like, that must be downtown. It lasts for an hour. Like, that's how many skyscrapers there are. And the sky is just like this blanket of gray smog. So I forged ahead, and I found a place that was too good to be true, because they were only going to charge us the equivalent of like $150 for the week to stay for the week and to have room and board, essentially. Right. So I was like, okay. And it was kind of in a cool little hippie town called São Tomé das Letras, which is hippie center. Okay. It's where people go to like buy their cool crystals and like frolic in waterfalls, like cleansing their aura. So I'd always been curious about São Tomé das Letras. Anyway, so great. I go ahead, I make the reservation. I say, okay, expect 2 of us that week. And they're like, great, we're so happy to have you, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just thinking this is one of those normal kind of posadas or like bed and breakfasts that they have in Brazil, which aren't as fancy as gringos think of them. It's just like a nice cottage where you can stay. And there's also going to be like some fruit in the morning. So Katie and Katie has only been in Brazil like 5-6 months, roll up to this place, and it ends up, we slowly start putting it together because there's no like intro, like, hey, this is like what we're about. But they just like take us to our room and we have a couple of bunk beds. We throw down our backpacks and we start walking around the place and we're like, what the hell is going on? There were these like 2-story tall concrete statues of aliens and speakers attached to the aliens that were playing this kind of music like 24 hours a day. And the music was like, And so we're slowly putting 2 and 2 together and we're realizing we are in a community of alien worshipers. Okay. I mean, I was personally stoked because I'm always down for adventure. I'd heard that said alien worshipers exist, and here I was in the heart of their community. But I was a little bit worried for my friend who, just come to Brazil, and she's like from Vermont, like pretty wholesome girl, pretty conservative, right? So I guess, Ryan, this is another story of how I brought someone over to the other side. But anyways, Katie and I still managed to have a normal day. We went to the waterfall that day. We had girl talk. We were talking about our relationship troubles. She was telling me about her boyfriend. They'd been dating so long. There was kind of like not a lot of spark left, but yet there was still this really strong feeling of loyalty and companionship. And then I was kind of talking about mine, how I was feeling like it was a little bit gray area as well. And anyways, put a pin in that. So we go to dinner that evening and we sit across the table from a man who says that he is a shaman and a psychic. And so, I mean, I'm thrilled because first of all, I hate going to dinner with like Sally from the Midwest and she wants to talk about like how great her mechanic is. I can't tell you how many times I've been like to an exotic corner of the world and I had to like tolerate the most mundane stories ever. So I was like psyched, right? Because I'm across the table from this old shaman and self-declared psychic dude. And I was well into my like yoga and hippiedom, but I still had a healthy amount of skepticism regarding the even more mystical things, which, like shaman and like psychic. So anyways, I said, hey, what's my spirit animal? Like the typical questions. And then somehow the relationship conversation started too. I think because we were both kind of looking for a little bit of guidance. And so this guy looks into Katie's relationship and he says, I'm getting more a picture of like, and mind you, we didn't give him any backstory at all. But the guy says, when I look at you and then when I look at your relationship, I'm seeing more of a brother-sister dynamic. And so she and I look at each other like, oh my God, he fucking like nailed it. Like that is exactly what you were saying, right? So of course. And I'm like, what about me? What about me? And he says something that I was not at all expecting. And he says, you know, I'm glad you're sitting down because what I'm seeing about the man that you're with is that he's actually dangerous. He's going to have police involvement and that you should basically get the fuck out of Dodge as soon as possible. And I'm like my mind is just absolutely blown because I'm dating a guy who is a law student, and I appreciate the irony, like, oh, like all lawyers are, you know, are thieves, but he was not yet a lawyer, and he was also kind of a wholesome guy. Okay, so I was like, what in God's name? Like, how on earth is this guy gonna have like police involvement? Whatever. I just completely wrote it off. So we end up going, we passed the week there. It was fine. We participated in a lot of their little alien worship moments, which were actually sort of, I would say they had a lot in common with even other esoteric traditions. You know, it's like, oh, let's meditate, let's ground, let's raise our vibration. So I was down with all of that. So we made it out alive. We're not abducted by aliens. And then I went back to my normal life in Sao Paulo. I lived with my boyfriend at that time. Fast forward, I don't know, like a week or so, and I go on a jog in the park. Okay. It's a park that's kind of far from my house. I'm gone from my home probably for about 2 hours to do this jog and then get back home and the rest of it. Okay, fine, normal. Fast forward to a couple of weeks and I'm starting to look at tickets to come home for the summer. And I go to buy my airplane ticket and there is zero money in my debit account. And I'm like, holy fuck, what's going on? Right. So I open my statement and I see that my statement is all like very expensive, like male clothing stores. Like the Rodeo, this person went to like the Rodeo Drive of Sao Paulo and bought like the most expensive suits possible and essentially like drained like $4,000 or $5,000 from my bank account. And I instantly had this feeling in the pit of my stomach when I heard the psychic's words echoing in my mind. And I was like, fuck. Oh no, it can't be, right? It can't be my boyfriend. Like my boyfriend couldn't have fucking ripped me off, right? Adding insult to injury because he was already kind of living off me. So I go home. I have the statement, and I also rewind to this moment like a few weeks ago where we were hanging out on a Sunday, and he gets up and he says, I've got to go pick up something at the tailor. And I was like, what kind of tailor's open on Sunday? And he was like, oh, blah, 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 some bullshit, right? And then he comes back home like an hour later with this bag and just hangs it in the closet. And so it's like all these scenes are like crashing together in my head, you know, just like one unpleasant epiphany after another as I connect the dots. And so I get home and I'm already having like my heart is beating so fast. I'm like, oh my God, am I sleeping with the enemy? He's in the shower, thank God. So I go to the closet and I unzip that bag, and it's the suit still had the tags on it from the same store, same price, just like, you know, Columbo. Like my detective work was expeditious, but also devastating. And I basically just like, I didn't know what to do. I panicked. So I kind of left my house and went to go stay with a friend before he could get out of the shower. And then I called him and I said, listen, you know, I'm directing the school play right now. We're opening night is in like, you know, 4 nights. And I'm just going to stay on this side of town while I wrap all that up. And sort of bought myself time to figure out what my recourses were. Turns out in Brazil that if you're living with someone for 6 months, you're already considered a common law marriage and they have right to a bunch of your shit, right? So anyways, I'm not going to bore you with all of the with the legal craziness, but essentially I decided to take his ass to court, and I confronted him the week later and at dinner, and I said, listen, I said, I know what happened. It's over. You need to move out of my house type thing. And he said that voices told him to do it. And could we still stay together? which is just hilarious. I mean, I've got to hand it to him. He was optimistic. But yeah, then I think his last argument was, I did this not against you, but against like, the man type thing, like against the corporation, and like, you're going to get your money back from the bank and XYZ. I'm like, dude, if that was true, like, why couldn't you buy me something nice? Right? Like, so anyways, I ended up taking his ass to court, and of course, like, he denied the whole thing, and I had to leave Brazil. That was kind of just the last straw for me with Brazilian men. Went to LA, and I don't know what became of him, but I know that a few years later he Facebook messaged me and he said, listen, I need you to drop the charges because I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. And I was kind of like, yeah, like that's exactly what happens. And then he Facebook messaged me like a couple months later and said, hey, listen, I won a trip to Vegas and I wonder if I could take you to Vegas to pay you back. This guy is absolutely hilarious. So anyways, I said no and unfriended him. But I think the silver lining of that story and how I would like to bring it back to the topic at hand is that was the moment when I said, this shit is real. Like, psychics exist. Like, how on earth could that man who I was having dinner with in an alien commune basically predict that something like this was going to happen, right? So that was the Easter that, I found aliens and that I found psychics and the power of psychic vision. And that was a game changer for me in my esoteric journey. Thank you for listening, boys and girls.
Oh my gosh! Thanks, Liz. Like, I'm so sorry that happened, but I like that story a lot. That's a lot of fun, and like, I'm super intrigued about the alien compound because, like, I don't know. Like, there's a lot to unpack for me there personally. Like, I'm into and / terrified of aliens. But there were I went through a back and forth a little bit with the cards to pair for that story. Two that I thought related, but I ultimately didn't end up choosing was the first was the Wheel of Fortune, just because the wheel spins and you go up and you go down and sort of life happens and you're not in control. And then the other card that I thought might relate to it is the Three of Swords, which is sort of knowledge, not painful knowledge, like knowledge of things that cuts a little bit, that hurts when they're brought awareness to. But ultimately, what I felt was really appropriate for that was one of my favorite major arcana cards, and this is kind of a unique version of it. It's missing some of the traditional tarot symbolism, but this is the moon. And the moon is one of the traditional signs of it is there's like this weird crayfish-like creature emerging from the water. And the idea, one of the ideas behind the moon card is that, like, if you're going to go into the esoteric, if you're going to kind of step outside of the unknown, you have to be aware for weird things to take place. And I think that's for Liz's story, going on an adventure, realizing you're on the alien compound, meeting the shaman, like, of course, like, something's going to emerge from the depths, and it is the truth about who she was in a relationship with through the shaman. I think that really is embodied with the knowledge of the moon and sort of and part of the one of the things with the moon card too is that it relates to the unconsciousness. And so I think, like for the shaman to be able to read that, there had to be, I think there had to be a little bit of that reflected in Liz too, that she wasn't seeing it, but that like that energy, like that on a certain level, she knew what was up with this guy, and that guy the shaman was able to read it off of her. And then, like, just as a side note, the balls to try to reconnect later, like, oh, how about we go on a hot date to Las Vegas and like everything's cool. Like, I can't believe the nerve of some people like that. That's so like I can't think of anything more uncomfortable than a weekend getaway with someone that stole money from me. Like, I can't get over I mean, the audacity of it all, stealing from someone you presumably care about and like, and then trying to make it up. The whole thing is mind-boggling. But I think lots of education there. Like I said, I'm sorry that happened, but that's a great story. I love that a lot. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Liz. And now's the part of the show where I take the 3 cards we have from our stories and put them together to do a reading. And just as a quick review, the cards were the 7 of Cups, the 8 of Pentacles, and the Moon. And I'm pretty happy. I'm always happy with the cards, but I'm pretty happy with this because there's 2 minor arcanas cards and a major arcana, and there's progression in the 2 minors leading to the major. So it's I think thinking about the cards all put together, you have the 7 of Cups, and it's all about illusion and deception and not seeing things accurately. And I think that there's a lot of that going on with the political situation in the world. There's things are starting to emerge that sort of we've been collectively under illusion and not seeing things accurately. And with like COVID, there's deliberate misinformation and things going on. And that sort of the idea that what we're seeing, what we're being presented with, might not actually reflect what's really going on, I think is an important thing to keep in mind. But then that has to be balanced with the 8 of Pentacles, which is about doing our own work and our own true purpose and our own calling. And just because things are being presented to you in a way that might not be honest, it doesn't change what our mission is, what our purpose is, what we choose to give value to. And I think certainly as there's kind of chaos in the wider world, our own vocation, our own work, our own spiritual endeavors become more important. And so I think that's in the face of an illusion, we can give value to what we know to be true, to what speaks to our hearts. And that sort of is a progression where, so we take the situation with the 7 of Cups and the illusion, and in spite of it, we carry forward with what's important to us. And that brings us to the Moon, which there's a note of magic to the Moon and things emerging from the depths. And like things with the Moon, like things get a little bit weird, like in Liz's story, like you might meet a shaman that tells you some information that you don't want to hear, but like that someone knows what's up. And I think by investing our own energy into our work and into what we give value to, that new things will emerge in our outer circumstances and in the world. And I think the Moon kind of speaks to a lot of what's going on with the pandemic, where things are unusual, and that there's a sense of we're not in, we're not in the light of the sun of everyday reality. We're under the light of the Moon there, and the familiar is taken on an unfamiliar tone, but it doesn't mean it's negative, and it's just something to adapt to and to incorporate. And so I think, and the things that are going to emerge from the situation, I think, will ultimately be to our benefit if we can hold on and be patient with how we interpret it, and if we can not react too negatively or not be dismissive out of hand of things. So I think what we have is sort of a doubling down. We have to reassert our own values in the face of sort of the messaging we're getting from the wider world, and then as a way to move forward, embrace the weirdness a little bit. And I think I try not to have the readings be too COVID specific, but I think it's in the air. It can't help but happen a little bit. And I think by focusing our intent and our value and our energy to what's important and what we know to be true, we can get through the weirdness of the situation, and we can harness the energy of the moon to move forward and progress. And so I'm really happy with that reading. I think there's a lot of value in the cards that came out tonight, and I hope that's of some reassurance and benefit to you guys for listening. And this has been Carded Tarot Tales. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back next week. I am experimenting. I'm using a platform called Stage 10, and I'm looking to move to Jitsi, but distractions keep cropping up. So we'll wait to see if that actually happens. But please join us again next week for another show and more great live storytellings. And I wanted to mention that Liz McDonald has a storytelling channel on YouTube. It's called Storytime with Dr. Liz. She has some really funny stories on there, and check it out for sure. It's a lot of fun, and like I love her to death. And like, if you get to know her, like if tonight wasn't enough of a taste to fall in love with her, like check out her channel. Like, she's great. And